My grandfather lifted his wine glass across a table shimmering beneath chandeliers and scented with cinnamon candles. "I'm glad to see you're enjoying the college fund we started for you," he said warmly. The words hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. My fork froze midway to my lips. "What college fund?" I asked. And just like that, laughter around the table stopped, as if someone had unplugged the moment. My father cleared his throat, coughing into his napkin as red wine dripped down his wrist. My mother's face drained of color, her lips parting soundlessly. Then my little cousin whispered, "Wait, you didn't know?" And that was Thanksgiving. The night a single careless toast set fire to everything I thought was family. By the time the dishes were cleared away, I wasn't their quiet, obedient daughter anymore. I was becoming someone they wouldn't recognize, someone they'd never see coming. Thanksgiving was meant to feel like coming home. But stepping into my grandfather's mansion had always felt more like entering a museum where I didn't belong. The driveway glowed beneath golden lights, and through the tall glass windows, I could already see my relatives gathered around the grand dining table. Everyone looked immaculate, silk ties, pressed dresses, and smiles polished for family photos. I smoothed the creases in my thrift store dress and forced myself to breathe. For once, I just wanted to make it through the evening without feeling like the outsider among my own blood. Inside, warmth and the scent of cinnamon filled the air. Grandma Margaret hurried out of the kitchen with a tray of sweet rolls, still calling me darling, the way she did when I was 10. Her voice was the only part of that house that ever felt genuine. Grandpa Daniel sat at the head of the table, silver hair gleaming beneath the chandelier, his presence commanding even in silence. When he saw me, his eyes softened. "There's my Hazel," he said, and for a brief second, the tightness in my chest eased. My parents arrived minutes later, loud, polished, their laughter a little too bright at Uncle Richard's jokes. My father patted my shoulder like we were acquaintances sharing the same last name. My mother leaned in, kissed the air beside my cheek, and whispered, "Try to look relaxed, sweetheart." I nodded, pretending not to hear the tremor in her voice. "Ethan," I said softly. But my brother didn't look up from his phone. It had been months since we'd exchanged more than a few words. When dinner began, the table glistened with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes glistening under pools of butter, and crystal glasses filled with wines I couldn't even pronounce. I sat between Grandma and Aunt Julie, who immediately began her usual interrogation: school, work, dating life, all wrapped in that syrupy tone that felt more like a pop quiz than genuine curiosity. I smiled politely, answering each question neatly while tracing the edge of my plate with my fingertip. At the far end, Grandpa's deep laugh rolled through the room, steady, confident, the sound of a man proud of the family he'd built. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed in the illusion. I wanted to because pretending was easier than remembering the truth, that my parents ignored my calls when rent was due, that they hadn't asked about my classes in months, that I was sitting at that expensive table in a dress bought with my last paycheck. The candles flickered. Someone poured more wine, and I let myself think, maybe this year will be different. Maybe warmth could last longer than one night. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice reminded me of the truth. Peace in this family always came just before the storm, and the storm broke the moment Grandpa set his glass down. His voice had carried laughter a second ago, but his words lingered in the air like smoke. "I'm glad you're enjoying the college fund we set up for you." For one heartbeat. No one moved. I blinked, my voice small but sharp enough to cut the silence. "What fund?" The reaction was instant. Dad's chair scraped back as he coughed hard, covering his mouth, wine splashing onto his sleeve. Mom's fork clattered against her plate, her face pale as paper. Even the chandelier light seemed colder. 8-year-old Mason looked up from his mashed potatoes, his wide eyes full of innocent confusion. "Wait, you didn't know?" he whispered. The room fell completely silent except for the hum of the heating vents. Grandpa frowned, his tone slower now, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "The fund," he repeated, as if that explained everything. "The one we opened when you were born," Grandpa said. "We've been adding to it every year since. Your parents have been the ones overseeing it." I turned toward my father. His face had gone crimson, his jaw locked tight. My mother's hand trembled, the silver band of her wedding ring clinking faintly against her plate. "You've been managing it?" I asked, each word heavier than the last. Because I've been surviving on $5 coffee shop wages and instant noodles, and somehow that fund never reached me. Mom's reply came out small, paper thin. Hazel, please. We only used it for real emergencies, for the house, for Ethan's braces. You are doing fine. Fine? I laughed, brittle and hollow. Do you even know what fine looked like for me? Working double shifts while studying, skipping meals just to cover rent? You called that fine? Grandpa's expression hardened. The pride in his shoulders vanished, replaced with cold disbelief. That money was never yours to touch, he said, voice directed at my parents. We made it clear it was meant for Hazel's education, her future. Dad's tone snapped from guilt to defense in an instant. Well, maybe if you hadn't insisted on putting it in our names. Enough. Grandpa's voice cut through the air like glass breaking. We trusted you. Silence crashed over the table. Grandma's eyes shone with unshed tears. Aunt Julie leaned forward, pretending concern while tasting the drama. My cousins stared down at their plates. And me, I couldn't breathe. I sat surrounded by glittering gold cutlery and fine china, realizing the family that preached loyalty had quietly stolen my future one emergency at a time. The scrape of my chair against the polished floor echoed like a scream. You let me drown, I said quietly. And you watched. Mom reached across the table, but I pulled back before she could touch me. Don't, I whispered, steady and cold. You don't get to fix this with tears. I stood. Above me, the chandelier flickered, shards of light scattering across their faces. No one followed as I walked out. In the hallway, my reflection caught in a gold-framed mirror, a stranger staring back, small, furious, trembling. And somewhere inside that shaking, a thought began to form. If they could lie that easily, they had no idea what the truth could do. Outside, the air bit colder than I remembered. My breath came out in sharp clouds as I crossed the driveway. Behind me, the mansion glowed gold and warm, but every window felt like an eye watching me leave. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The drive home was silent, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. When I finally reached my apartment, my dress still carried the scent of roses and smoke. I tore it off and let it fall to the floor, sitting on the edge of my bed as the shaking returned. Grandpa's voice kept echoing in my head. The fund we set up for you. And Dad's weak defense. We meant to replace it. Each word replayed like a lie I'd been raised to accept. The room around me suddenly felt smaller. The peeling paint, the flickering bulb, the stack of bills on my desk. Some envelopes were half open, others untouched. Rent, tuition, groceries, interest. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd told myself struggle built character. It had all been for nothing. They'd let me starve for pride while padding their comfort with money meant for me. I opened my laptop and searched the name of the bank Grandpa had once mentioned in passing, one I'd never used. After an hour of dead ends and phone transfers, I finally reached someone willing to help. Can you check if there's an account under my name? Hazel Anderson. The hold music dragged on forever before a cautious voice returned. Yes, but the balance is zero. The word landed softly, almost apologetic, but it hurt worse for it. There have been regular withdrawals, the representative added after a pause. All authorized by John and Linda Anderson. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark. No tears, no noise, just the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. By morning, I was at the campus legal aid office, clutching a folder packed with loan statements, pay stubs, and scholarship letters. The woman behind the desk listened quietly as I explained everything. She turned the pages slowly, eyes narrowing in thought. When she finally looked up, her expression was calm but firm. Hazel, she said, if that fund was meant for your education and your parents used it for themselves, that's not just unfair. That's misappropriation. The word hung in the air between us. Heavy, legal, and final. Is that a crime? I asked quietly. It can be, she replied softly. If you choose to pursue it, start gathering proof. That night, I did exactly that. By the time I was finished, my floor was covered in evidence. Bills, receipts, bank records, every trace of the years I'd spent scraping by without their help. The papers formed a sea of my survival, spread edge to edge until not a patch of carpet remained. Each document felt like a scar I could finally look at. When I stood back and saw the full picture, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't powerless anymore. They'd raised me to believe silence was strength. But now I understood. Real strength was speaking first and letting the truth echo afterward. Christmas came faster than I expected, wrapped in hollow cheer and lights that glowed without warmth. The mansion that had gleamed proudly on Thanksgiving now looked colder, its golden chandeliers unable to disguise the fractures beneath the shine. I almost didn't go. But then Grandpa called himself. "You should be here, Hazel," he said simply. "You belong here." So I went. Not as the quiet girl they remembered, but as a woman who finally knew what they'd done. The door opened to that same familiar scent, cinnamon and old wealth. My parents stood near the fireplace, immaculate as ever, matching the decor like they'd been arranged there. "Hazel, you came." Mom's voice lifted, too bright, as if my arrival were some kind favor. Dad gave a short nod, his jaw locked. He hadn't looked me directly in the eye since Thanksgiving. Ethan barely glanced up from the couch, muttering a half-hearted, "Hey." I hung my coat and glanced toward the dining room. Everything was exactly as before. Same china, same crystal glasses, same perfectly folded napkins. Only the warmth was gone. Grandma lingered near the kitchen doorway, nervously twisting the hem of her apron. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable, eyes taking in everything without a word. Dinner began the way every Anderson dinner did, forced smiles wrapped around small talk. The weather, work, prices. Aunt Julie's voice slid through the air, honeyed and sharp. "So, Hazel, still in that little apartment, dear?" Uncle Richard pretended not to hear. I stayed quiet, waiting. Halfway through the meal, Dad stood, tapping his spoon against his glass. "I just want to say," he began, a practiced grin on his face, "that family is everything. We've faced challenges this year, but what matters most is sticking together." Bitterness flickered in my throat, but I swallowed it. Instead, I reached down and lifted the folder resting beside me, placing it gently on the table. The soft thud of it hitting the wood silenced the room. "Since Thanksgiving," I said evenly, "I've been asking one question. What fund?" The air tightened. Grandpa looked up sharply. Mom's hand froze halfway to her glass. "I have the answer now." I slid the folder toward the center of the table. "Every withdrawal, every signature, every date. You didn't use that fund for me. You spent it on yourselves, on the roof, the car, Ethan's braces, groceries, vacations. Every cent," Mom's voice shook. "Hazel, please, not tonight." "Not tonight?" I cut her off. "I spent years patching my shoes with duct tape while you sat on money meant for me. I starved through finals so you could play perfect parents. You told everyone I was doing fine." Dad's expression hardened. "We did what we had to do for the family." I met his stare. "No, you did what was easiest for you. I was the family." A silence fell so deep I could hear the clock ticking. Once, twice. Grandma whispered, "Oh my God," barely audible. Then Grandpa reached for the folder. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, bank statements, payment receipts, tuition notices. When he finally looked up, his voice was low, but each word landed like a blade. "You stole from your own daughter," he said to my parents. "From your own blood." Mom's tears came fast, uneven. "We didn't mean to hurt her. You drained her future," Grandpa snapped, the sharpness in his tone slicing the air. "And you lied to me about it for years." Dad tried to speak, but Grandpa's glare froze him in place. "I trusted you, John," he said, voice breaking. "I trusted you with her life." No one moved. No one breathed. Then I spoke, calm but certain. "I've already filed a report. The bank's investigation is open. They'll contact you soon about repayment and legal action." The room seemed to crack open with tension. Dad's palm hit the table hard. "You're taking your own parents to court?" He shouted. "No," I said calmly. "I'm holding thieves accountable." "That's not the same thing." Mom's sobs deepened, trembling through the silence. "Hazel, you can't do this to us." I met her eyes and felt nothing but a cold distance. "You did this to yourselves." "You just never expected me to see it." Aunt Julie leaned closer, muttering, "Good Lord," as if she were watching a film too painful to look away from. Ethan sat frozen, guilt flickering in his eyes. Grandpa rose slowly, his chair scraping across the floor. He circled the table and stopped beside me. For a second, I thought he might scold me for creating a scene, but instead, he rested a steady hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone," he murmured. My throat tightened as I nodded. "I know." Dad's gaze darted between us, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You're siding with her?" he demanded. "There's only one side here," Grandpa said firmly. The truth, the silence that followed, was thick and final. The clock ticked in the background, steady and indifferent, while the fire hissed in the hearth. I gathered the folder, slid it into my bag, and stood up. My legs no longer trembled. As I reached the doorway, Mom's voice cracked through her tears. "Please, Hazel, we can fix this." I turned once more. "You can't fix what you never meant to keep whole." Outside, snow drifted down in heavy silence. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I welcomed it. Each step away from that house felt like shedding a weight. In the driveway, my car was blanketed in white. I brushed the snow from the windshield with my sleeve, opened the door, and looked back one last time. The mansion glowed behind me, beautiful, distant, and broken. Inside, they'd be sitting in that silence, finally facing what they'd done. For the first time, I didn't feel small. As I drove off, snowflakes swirled through the headlights like falling ash. The house faded in the rearview mirror, and I whispered to no one, "Everything's falling apart again, but this time, it's not me who's breaking." A week later, a thick envelope arrived from the bank, sealed with an official stamp. I stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. The letter confirmed that an investigation had begun. Every forged signature, every withdrawal, every suspicious transfer was under review. If fraud was proven, my parents would be held liable. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Justice doesn't feel like joy. It feels like finally taking a breath after years underwater. A few days later, Grandpa called. He didn't ask about the case. He simply said, "There's something waiting for you at the bank." When I arrived, the teller handed me a cashier's check and a small folded note written in his handwriting. "For your beginning, not your survival." It was for $20,000, enough to lift the weight without erasing how it got there. That afternoon, I paid down my student loans. Watching the debt shrink on the screen didn't feel triumphant. It felt like reclaiming stolen time. I opened a new bank account under my name alone. No shared access. No loopholes. Just mine. Spring came early that year. Under a pale sky, I walked across the graduation stage, wearing a borrowed cap and a smile that finally felt real. In the crowd, Grandpa and Grandma clapped proudly. My parents weren't there. I told myself it didn't matter, and for once, it truly didn't. Crossing that stage, I carried no shame but my own, and the quiet peace that comes when a storm has finally passed. They say family is forever, but forever doesn't mean blind loyalty. Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. I once believed strength meant silence, that keeping the peace was worth any cost. But silence only shields those who hurt you. Family isn't defined by blood, it's the people who don't steal your future. If you've ever chosen truth over family, tell me where you're listening from. So I'll know I'm not the only one, and keep following, because the next story might remind you just how strong you already are.